They say home is where the heart is. But what if your peaceful home suddenly turns into a battleground? All because of your dog. That's exactly what happened to this Redditor, who woke up one day to find a letter on their doorstep. It wasn't a welcome note. It wasn't a neighbor saying hello. It was a fine. Over $1,200. From a homeowners association they didn't even belong to. Imagine that. You're living your life, walking your dog like usual, minding your business, and then bam, you're being told your dog is now banned. Not only that, but you're being charged over $1,000 for simply existing. And here's the kicker. You never signed up for this. You never agreed to any of their rules. You're not even part of their community group. So how do they think they have power over you? At first, it seems like a mistake. Maybe they got the wrong house. Maybe they sent the letter to the wrong person. But no, it's addressed to you. Your name, your address, your dog. And the fine is very real. Not only that, but it keeps getting worse. Every week, another notice, another threat. More money added to the bill. And the HOA? They're silent when you ask questions. Or worse, they respond with cold, robotic answers that make you feel like you're in trouble for something you didn't do. It's like being trapped in a game where you don't know the rules, and nobody will explain them to you. Now imagine standing in your own front yard, leash in hand, your dog sitting calmly beside you. Maybe he wags his tail. Maybe he barks once. Suddenly, a neighbor looks at you like you've done something horrible. Like your dog is some kind of monster. All because someone in a meeting decided that certain dogs just aren't welcome. No warning. No discussion. Just rules being forced on you. And fines. Lots of fines. So now you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. You can't give up your dog. He's family. But you also can't keep ignoring these fines that keep showing up. Even though, deep down, something feels very wrong about the whole thing. Like legally wrong. Like someone is overstepping where they shouldn't be. You start digging. You read through your property documents. You look into the history of your neighborhood. That's when things really start to get weird. What you find next will make your jaw drop. Because this isn't just about a dog anymore. It's about power, control, and what happens when people think they can push you around just because they assume you won't push back. And when you do push back, that's when things get really interesting. The person telling this story, let's just call them Opie, had been living in their home for a few years without any issues. It was a quiet neighborhood, nothing fancy, just regular houses with friendly neighbors and the occasional block party. The kind of place where you wave at people while walking your dog, and everyone just minds their business. Their house was one of the older ones on the street, built before the neighborhood expanded and turned into something more organized. Or at least, that's what people called it, organized. What actually happened was that a new HOA was formed when a bunch of newer homes were built nearby. That HOA covered a specific part of the neighborhood, but Opie's home wasn't included. It never had been. Their house was on land that had its own rules, its own deed, and absolutely no agreement tying them to the Homeowners Association. So life went on. Opie took care of their yard, kept things clean, and walked their dog like clockwork every morning. The dog, by the way, was a total sweetheart. Medium-sized, fluffy, well-trained. Let's call him Max. Max didn't bark much. He didn't dig holes. He wasn't aggressive. He just loved sniffing bushes, chasing squirrels, and sitting beside Opie while they drank coffee on the porch. No one had ever complained. Not once. Not until one day, out of nowhere, Opie noticed something different about the street. New signs had gone up. HOA property rules enforced. That seemed odd, because Opie had always known those rules didn't apply to their side of the block. But maybe it was just for the new houses. A few days later, that's when the first letter arrived. It looked official. The HOA's name was printed at the top. It had legal-looking language and bold letters warning about violations. At first, Opie laughed it off. This must be a mistake, they thought. But then they saw what it was about. A ban dog. A specific breed ban. And a fine of several $100s. The letter didn't just say the dog had to go. It said they were now being penalized for each day the dog was in violation of the HOA's regulations. The total started at $250. then jumped to $500, then $1, 200, and counting. That's when the uneasiness began to settle in. How could a group they never joined suddenly tell them how to live? How could they find them for a dog that had lived there peacefully for years? It felt surreal, like waking up in someone else's dream, where none of the logic made sense, but the consequences were somehow very real. Opie double-checked everything. Their purchase agreement, their closing documents. Nowhere, nowhere, did it say anything about being under HOA authority. They didn't sign anything. They weren't bound by any of it. And yet, these letters kept coming, more aggressive each time. It didn't feel like a misunderstanding anymore. It felt like a trap. At this point, Opie was beyond confused. It wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. The HOA seemed dead serious. Every letter they sent had new warnings, new threats. The fines were stacking up fast. The total had passed $1, 200, and it wasn't slowing down. And all of this was because of Max, the dog who spent most of his time napping in the sun and wagging his tail at butterflies. Apparently, Max's breed was on some kind of restricted list created by the HOA. A list that Opie never agreed to, never signed, never even saw until now. The reasoning made no sense. Max had never caused harm. He had no record of complaints. Yet the HOA claimed he was a danger, a liability, and had to be removed from the property immediately. They gave Opie 10 days to comply, or face even bigger fines and legal consequences. Opie tried to reach out. They called the number on the letter. No one picked up. They left messages. No one returned them. They sent an email, politely asking for clarification. Days passed with no reply. Then came another letter. More aggressive. This time, the HOA claimed they had photographic evidence. A blurry photo of Max sitting in the front yard, as if that proved anything. It wasn't a crime scene. It was a dog enjoying fresh air. Neighbors started noticing. Some asked what was going on. Others avoided eye contact, suddenly acting cold. It was clear the HOA had started whispering behind the scenes. Opie wasn't just getting fined. They were being treated like a rule breaker, a threat, for simply living in their own home with the same dog they'd always had. One neighbor, who'd lived nearby for years, pulled Opie aside. "I heard you're being fined," she said quietly. "But your house isn't in the HOA, right?" Opie nodded. "Then they can't do this," she whispered. "You should fight it." That was the moment Opie realized this wasn't just about money or even rules. It was about pressure, power. The HOA was acting like they owned the whole street, even parts that were never theirs. They were testing the limits, pushing boundaries, hoping people wouldn't question it. And a lot of people didn't. Most homeowners were afraid to make waves. They paid fines even when things felt unfair. They followed every little rule. Because the HOA was known for being strict, known for targeting people. And now, Opie was their latest target. The stress started creeping in. Opie began double-checking the mailbox every day, worried about the next letter. They kept Max indoors more often, walked him late at night, all to avoid more attention. But deep down, they knew this couldn't continue. Something had to give. The HOA was acting like a bully, and Opie was getting tired of being quiet.
Opie had had enough. The next step wasn't a polite email or a hopeful phone call. It was research. Real, deep, focused digging. If the HOA wanted to act like they had power, Opie needed proof they didn't. So, they went through everything. Old property records, tax documents, their closing paperwork from when they bought the house. And finally, buried in a stack of scanned PDFs, they found it, the smoking gun. It was a legal document, stamped and signed, showing the exact boundaries of the HOA. There it was in black and white, a clear line drawn around the newer part of the neighborhood. Opie's house sat comfortably outside of it. There was no overlap, no ambiguity. The HOA had no claim. They even called the county clerk's office just to double-check. The clerk confirmed it without hesitation. "Nope, your property isn't under any homeowners association. If they're trying to fine you, that's not legal." OP almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how ridiculous this had all become. For weeks, they'd been stressed out, losing sleep, walking on eggshells, over nothing. The HOA was bluffing, trying to intimidate them with official-looking letters and empty threats. Now armed with real proof, OP wasn't playing defense anymore. They wrote a letter. This one wasn't friendly or vague. It was direct, firm. They stated clearly that they were not part of the HOA, never had been, and any further contact would be considered harassment. They attached the county records and a copy of the signed boundary map. And they made one more thing clear: if the HOA didn't stop, OP would contact an attorney. The tone changed immediately. Suddenly, the HOA responded. The next email was very different. No more threats. No more fines. Just a short message saying they would review the information provided and make necessary adjustments. It was the first time they didn't sound like a robot reading from a script. But OP wasn't done. They posted their story on Reddit, in the r/legal advice subreddit, hoping someone with real legal experience could confirm what they already knew. The post blew up. Thousands of people read it. Lawyers, homeowners, HOA survivors. The replies came pouring in. Dozens of users confirmed that the HOA was acting way out of line. Some shared similar stories. Others offered tips on what legal language to use. A few even encouraged OP to sue the HOA for damages or emotional distress. One lawyer in the comments spelled it out: they have no jurisdiction. If they contact you again, send a cease and desist letter. You could easily win in small claims court if you wanted. And just like that, OP wasn't alone anymore. People were fired up. Strangers from all over were backing them, offering advice, and sharing outrage. The post became more than just a cry for help. It became a warning to others. HOAs can overstep. And if they do, you don't have to sit back and take it. OP decided to take the advice seriously. They drafted a cease and desist letter, just like the Reddit lawyers suggested. It was short, sharp, and left no room for misinterpretation. It stated clearly that the HOA had no legal authority over their property and that all contact regarding fines or rules must stop immediately. It ended with one final line: further communication would be considered harassment and dealt with legally. They sent the letter by certified mail, with a delivery receipt. This time, they wanted proof that it had been seen, that it couldn't be ignored. And once it was delivered, everything went quiet. No more letters. No more fines. Not a single word from the HOA. For the first time in weeks, OP could breathe. They could walk max without looking over their shoulder. They could enjoy their yard without wondering if someone was snapping pictures behind a bush. It felt like freedom, like getting their life back from something that had been slowly choking it. But even in that silence, OP stayed ready. They kept all the documents in a folder, labeled and dated. They printed out their Reddit post, along with the comments from legal experts. They took screenshots of everything, just in case the HOA decided to try again. Because once someone shows you they're willing to lie, you don't take chances. Then came something unexpected. A neighbor knocked on OP's door. Not one of the cold ones who had avoided them, but someone new. She introduced herself and said she'd recently received a notice from the HOA too. Something about her trash bins being left out too long. She'd heard OP had pushed back and won. She wanted to know how. That conversation turned into another. Then another. More neighbors started coming forward, quietly, carefully, asking how OP did it. How they found the documents. Who they talked to. What to write in a letter. Turns out, OP wasn't the only one being targeted. The HOA had been slowly creeping their authority into areas they didn't control. Some people didn't question it. Others were scared. But OP's story gave them something rare, proof that they could say no. That's when OP realized this wasn't just about them or Max. This was bigger. It was about power. And the way small groups, like HOAs, can push boundaries and hope no one notices. The way they rely on silence and fear to stay in control. So OP kept talking, kept helping, kept sharing their story. Because once you know your rights, and once you see that you can fight back, it's hard to stay quiet. And even harder to watch other people get pushed around when you know exactly how to stop it. Word started to spread. OP's quiet stand had started something the HOA didn't see coming. Neighbors who'd never spoken much before were now stopping by to talk. They weren't just asking for advice. They were sharing their own stories. One man had been fined for putting up a bird feeder. Another had been told to remove a swing set that had been in his yard for 5 years. A couple down the street got a letter about their mailbox color. The more people talked, the more they realized this wasn't random. The HOA had been slowly testing how far they could push people, especially the ones who didn't know the rules, or didn't realize they weren't actually bound by them. And now, for the first time, people weren't staying quiet. They were pushing back. OP started gathering everything into one place. A shared folder online. It had links to public records, maps, deed restrictions, even templates for cease and desist letters. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. People began using it. One neighbor successfully stopped a fine for a flower bed that was too bright. Another used OP's documents to prove her home wasn't part of the HOA at all. What started as one person defending their dog had turned into a quiet movement. A neighborhood waking up. Some of the board members didn't take kindly to it. There were rumors going around. OP heard whispers that they were causing trouble, that they were trying to turn people against the HOA. But OP didn't care anymore. If trouble meant standing up for what was right, then so be it. Then came the meeting. The HOA called for a special meeting, claiming it was just for general updates. But everyone knew it was about the growing resistance. More people showed up than usual. Some had never attended a meeting before. OP didn't even speak. They just watched and listened. One neighbor finally stood up and asked the board directly, "Why are you finding homes that aren't even in the HOA?" There was a long silence. The board tried to dodge the question, claimed there had been confusion about boundaries. But people weren't buying it anymore. OP had passed out printed copies of the original HOA boundary map before the meeting started. A few residents actually brought theirs and held them up. The tension was thick. The board members looked uncomfortable. People were asking questions they didn't want to answer. And for once, it was the HOA on the defensive. The atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't just one person fighting anymore. It was a group, a community. And the more people learned, the more confident they became. What had started with a single dog and an unfair fine had turned into a neighborhood standing together, realizing that rules only work when they're fair, and when the people enforcing them are held accountable. After the meeting, something changed in the neighborhood. People weren't just talking anymore, they were organizing. Quiet conversations on porches turned into small gatherings. OP helped set up a group chat where residents could share updates, documents, and experiences. It wasn't about starting a rebellion. It was about making sure no one got pushed around again. The HOA board tried to go back to business as usual, but the usual tactics weren't working. Letters that used to scare people now got questioned. Fines were challenged. People were asking for proof, for maps, for copies of bylaws. The silence the HOA had relied on for years was gone. And it made them nervous. One afternoon, OP got a knock on the door. It was one of the board members. Not the president, just a regular member. He looked uncomfortable. Said he wanted to clear the air. OP let him talk. He said the board didn't realize there were so many concerns. That they never intended to cause problems. That maybe things had gotten a little too strict. OP didn't argue. They didn't yell. They just asked a simple question. If you knew my house wasn't part of the HOA, why did you send me fines? The board member hesitated. Said it was a mistake. That the database had some outdated information. That it wouldn't happen again. OP didn't believe it, not entirely. But they didn't need to. Because by now, the board knew they couldn't get away with pretending anymore. People were watching. People were aware. A few days later, a new letter came in. This one wasn't a fine or a threat. It was an apology. Official, typed, and signed by the HOA president. It stated that OP's property was, in fact, not under HOA jurisdiction and that all previous correspondence should be disregarded. It said the HOA would be reviewing its practices to ensure similar situations didn't happen again. It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase the stress, the late nights, the fear of losing Max. But it was a small win, and a clear signal that the pressure had worked. OP shared the letter with the neighbors in the group chat. The response was immediate. Messages flooded in with reactions ranging from relief to applause to outright celebration. For the first time, people felt like they had some power. Like their voices mattered. And OP. They didn't go back to life exactly as it was. They still kept the folder of documents. Still helped neighbors sort out their own HOA issues. Max still got his morning walks, tail wagging proudly as if he knew he'd won too. Because in a neighborhood where people had felt powerless for so long, one person standing up had changed everything. Not by shouting, but by showing the truth. By not backing down. And by reminding everyone that sometimes, even the quietest fight can spark the biggest change. As the weeks passed, something strange started happening. More people from outside the neighborhood, complete strangers, began messaging OP through Reddit. They'd seen the original post in r/legal advice and were dealing with similar issues. Some had HOAs charging random fines with no explanation. Others had dogs like Max, banned without reason. A few weren't even part of their HOA, just like OP, yet still being threatened with legal action. OP did their best to help. They shared their documents, gave advice on what to say, and encouraged everyone to stand firm. It was exhausting at times, but also empowering. Every message that said, "Your story helped me fight back," reminded OP that their battle wasn't isolated. It was part of something bigger. Back in the neighborhood, things weren't perfect, but they were different. The HOA had gone quiet for a while, clearly shaken by the backlash. They stopped issuing petty warnings. Some board members stepped down, replaced by newer, more reasonable voices. One even asked OP to consider joining, to bring balance to the board. OP declined politely. They didn't want to become part of the machine. They just wanted it to stop hurting people. Meanwhile, Max was back to being the king of the block. Kids played with him. Neighbors stopped to give him treats. It was like everyone knew what he represented, a symbol of the moment the community pushed back. A few neighbors who had stayed quiet before finally started speaking up too. One man admitted he'd ignored his own fine for months, too afraid to ask questions. Another woman said she thought she was the only one who felt bullied by the board. Hearing OP's story gave them the courage to speak out. More meetings were held, but now they felt different. People actually showed up, not just to complain but to participate. The atmosphere was less about control and more about cooperation. Issues were addressed, not buried. Rules were reviewed, not blindly enforced. It was slow progress, but it was real. Then, someone suggested starting a neighborhood committee, not an HOA, but a group run by residents, focused on helping each other, not policing. The idea took off. OP was asked to lead it, and this time, they said yes. Not to control anyone, but to make sure no one else had to go through what they did alone. What had started as one dog, one letter, and one very confused homeowner had turned into a chain reaction. People learned that rules don't beat rights. That one voice, even if it starts shaky, can grow loud enough to shake the walls. And that sometimes, the best way to fight power isn't to fight at all, but to shine a light so bright, it can't hide anymore. And Max. He was still wagging his tail, chasing butterflies, and soaking up every bit of sunshine like nothing had ever happened. Like a true legend who knew all along, this yard was home, and no one was going to take that away.